I think you could call the story from today's lectionary reading from Mark's Gospel as a story that is deceptively simple. I mean, it is simple in the sense that it is a healing story. You might say just another healing story, and healing stories are commonplace, of course, in the Gospels, an everyday part of the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus heals people in all kinds of ways, and here he heals a blind beggar called Bartimaeus. Deceptively simple, because it seems to me there are so many layers to the story that we're going to hear. And I know you could say that of any of the miracle stories of Jesus. They are deeply symbolic, but all the more so of this one. And just taking, for example, where this falls in the Gospel, it's at the end of chapter 10 of Mark's Gospel. Chapter 11 is the story of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, the Palm Sunday story, which really begins the Passion story that Mark tells. And so chapter 10 is the end, as it were, of the first part of Mark's Gospel, of the public ministry of Jesus. As we hear this story, I think we can hear a pivot point in the Gospel, a dramatic pivot point in the story when things are changing at a really profound level. So let's listen. Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to the end. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Well, there are many ways, I think, in which we can describe the transition that is happening as we listen to this story, this pivotal moment in the Gospel. But one of the ways which I find helpful to think about this is to think about the way in which the encounter with Jesus gives Bartimaeus agency. Agency being a way to describe how, as human beings, we discover a sense of purpose, a sense of being enabled to do things, to have a part to play in the bigger story of what's going on around us, rather than simply being passengers or being swept along by life. As I think about how one might dramatize this reading, what is most striking visually is that we begin with a very static Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, sat by the road, and like beggars even in our own age, people on the streets in our own age, sitting still whilst the crowds pass by. And all he can do is to call out, to cry out. What happens, though, when he encounters Jesus? And fascinating to see that actually what Jesus does, first of all, is Jesus stands still. Not actually with or alongside Bartimaeus, but there is that sense of Jesus putting himself where Bartimaeus is, in the sense of being still, being inert for a moment, inactive. But then, what happens to Bartimaeus? Bartimaeus suddenly comes to life. Bartimaeus suddenly jumps up, he springs up, he sprang up, our reading tells us. He throws off his cloak and he comes to Jesus. What a contrast to that picture of the man simply sat as the crowds passed by calling out. Something has shifted. Something has changed. And that sense of agency is underlined when Jesus asks of him, "What do you want me to do for you?" It must have been fairly obvious to Jesus what would make a difference in a blind beggar's life. The clue, of course, is in the description. But Jesus asks him. And so Bartimaeus, once again, is setting the agenda. He's saying, "My teacher, let me see again." That shift from the man who is stuck in one place to become the man who is actually able to be part of the story. And of course, the story ends significantly. When he's regained his sight, we are told that Bartimaeus followed Jesus on the way. And that expression, of course, is pregnant with symbolism, because the early followers of Jesus were called people of the way. Bartimaeus is part of that journey, absolutely. He has agency, he has a part to play in the story. And I wonder what that says to us at a personal level and what we feel faith does for us. We can describe the move into faith in all kinds of ways. Often we would use the language of being forgiven, of having a burden of guilt lifted from us. We might use the language of discovering ourselves to be treasured children of God, a place in God's family. Both of those languages, both those expressions talk about agency and discovering something about ourselves and our place within the picture, the wider story, and becoming people who have agency as people who work with Jesus, build the kingdom of God. Well, as a church also, we know the life of the church sometimes can become very static, and we can feel, particularly in our own day and age, very helpless and feel the world is just passing us by. But when we discover really what it means to be people on the way with Jesus, we can rediscover, I believe, that sense of how we can make a difference, how we have a part to play, how we can be builders of the kingdom in our own community and amongst those amongst whom we live and work and play. So let's just focus on that word. What does it mean to be given agency through our faith in Jesus? To discover how we can be partners in the work of the gospel of Jesus and the building of his kingdom.